The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Pierce mansion, casting golden rectangles across marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. Victoria Pierce stood in front of her walk-in closet, a space larger than many studio apartments, staring at rows of designer clothes with the kind of bored dissatisfaction that comes from having everything and valuing nothing. At 23, Victoria had never worked a day in her life. She didn't need to. Her father, Richard Pierce, had built a tech empire worth $8 billion, and Victoria was his only child, his princess, the center of a universe that revolved entirely around her whims and desires. She had 3 credit cards with no limits, a trust fund that generated more money monthly than most families saw in a year, and a collection of sports cars that sat in the 8-car garage like expensive toys she'd grown bored of. She was beautiful in the way that money could perfect. Personal trainers, nutritionists, the best salons, subtle cosmetic enhancements that she'd never admit to. Her hair fell in perfect waves of honey blonde. Her skin glowed with the results of monthly spa treatments, and her clothes were always impeccable, always designer, always worn once or twice before being discarded. But if you looked closely, really looked, you might see something else beneath the polished exterior. A hardness around her eyes, a curl of discontent at the corner of her mouth. A woman who'd had every material thing handed to her, but had never been taught the value of any of it. Victoria's mother had died when she was 6, a quick and brutal cancer that took her in less than a year. Richard Pierce had responded to his grief by burying himself in work and showering his daughter with everything money could buy. Nannies raised her, private tutors educated her, staff catered to her every need. And somewhere along the way, Victoria learned that people existed to serve her, that her desires mattered more than anyone else's needs, that the world owed her everything simply because of who her father was. She'd been expelled from 3 private schools for her behavior. She'd cycled through dozens of staff members who quit after enduring her demands and tantrums. She'd burned through friendships with everyone except a small circle of equally wealthy, equally entitled young people who enabled each other's worst impulses. This particular morning, Victoria was in a foul mood. Her father had actually said no to her for once, refusing to buy her the Parisian apartment she'd seen online, and decided she needed immediately. They'd had a screaming fight in his study the night before, Victoria hurling accusations and insults while Richard tried to explain that even he had limits, that she needed to show some responsibility, that she couldn't just have everything she pointed at. It had ended with Victoria storming out, taking one of her cars, the red Ferrari, and driving too fast through the city streets, running a red light and narrowly avoiding an accident. She'd gone to a club, drunk too much expensive champagne, and come home at 4 in the morning to find her father waiting up, his face haggard with worry and frustration. Now, standing in her closet, Victoria felt the familiar restlessness that plagued her constantly. She had everything, and it all felt like nothing. She was bored and angry and empty in a way she couldn't articulate and didn't want to examine. She grabbed a Chanel bag and Gucci sunglasses, deciding to go shopping. Shopping always helped. The act of buying things, of seeing salespeople fawn over her, of swiping her credit card without looking at prices, it filled the emptiness, at least temporarily. Her phone rang as she was heading down the curved marble staircase. Her father. Victoria let it go to voicemail. She wasn't ready to hear another lecture about responsibility or moderation or any of the other concepts that didn't apply to her life. She got in her white Range Rover, the Ferrari was too flashy for daytime shopping, and drove toward the upscale district where all the boutiques knew her by name. The day was clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect spring morning that made the city look clean and full of possibility. Victoria didn't notice any of it. She was scrolling through her phone as she drove, checking social media, responding to messages from her friends, not paying attention to the road the way she should have been. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Victoria accelerated, planning to run it. But a city bus was slower to clear the intersection than she'd anticipated, and suddenly she was slamming on her brakes, her Range Rover skidding slightly before coming to a stop inches from the bus's rear bumper. Her heart pounded from the near miss. Other drivers honked at her, and Victoria responded by laying on her own horn, as if the near accident had been everyone else's fault. She was so busy being angry, so focused on her phone and her irritation, that she didn't see the small figure crossing the street in the crosswalk beside her. But she heard the thud. Time seemed to slow down. Victoria looked up from her phone to see a small child on the ground beside her car, having apparently walked into her side mirror, which jutted out farther than she'd realized. The child was crying, holding their arm, and standing over them was a man who immediately dropped to his knees beside the child. Victoria's first instinct was to drive away. Her second was to check if anyone had seen. Her third, finally, after those two shameful impulses had passed, was to get out of the car. By the time she opened her door, a small crowd had gathered. The man, Victoria could see now that he was a dwarf, maybe 3.5 feet tall, dressed in work clothes and sturdy boots, had the child in his arms, a boy who looked about 7 or 8, checking him over with gentle, practiced movements. "Are you okay, buddy? Let me see your arm. Does this hurt? What about here?" The man's voice was calm and soothing, despite the obvious worry in his eyes. The child whimpered, tears running down his face, but seemed more scared than seriously hurt. Victoria stood awkwardly beside her expensive car, not sure what to do, acutely aware of the people staring at her, some with phones out, possibly recording. "Is he okay?" Victoria asked, her voice coming out sharper than she'd intended, defensive rather than concerned. The man looked up at her, and Victoria saw his eyes clearly for the first time. Dark brown, expressive, currently filled with a mix of concern for the child and something else when he looked at her. Not anger, exactly. More like disappointment, as if he'd looked at her and found her lacking before she'd even spoken. "He will be," the man said evenly. "But you need to be more careful. That mirror caught his arm as he was walking past. You're supposed to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk." Victoria felt her face flush. "I was stopped," she protested. "He walked into my car." "Your car was over the line," an older woman in the crowd interjected. "I saw the whole thing. You ran the yellow light and stopped halfway into the crosswalk." Victoria looked at the woman, ready to argue, but more people were nodding in agreement. She glanced back at the traffic light. From this angle, she could see that, yes, her Range Rover was indeed partially blocking the crosswalk. The man was still focused on the child, who had calmed down enough to show him his arm. There was a red mark, but no blood, no obvious injury. "I think he's okay," the man said, looking around at the crowd. "Did anyone see where his parents are?" A middle-aged man stepped forward. "That's my nephew. I'm watching him today. I was getting coffee right there." He pointed to a cafe on the corner. "And he was supposed to wait for me, but I guess he saw something across the street." He trailed off, looking embarrassed and relieved in equal measure. The dwarf man carefully helped the boy to his feet, keeping a steadying hand on his shoulder. "He's going to have a bruise, but I think he's all right. Still, you might want to have a doctor look at him just to be safe. And, buddy," he crouched down to the boy's eye level, "next time, wait for your uncle before you cross the street, okay? Even in a crosswalk, you have to make sure cars see you." The boy nodded, sniffling, and the uncle thanked the man profusely before leading the child away toward the cafe, presumably to call his parents. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people threw Victoria looks that ranged from disapproving to outright hostile. She stood there feeling exposed and defensive, her hands clenched at her sides. The dwarf man stayed, looking at Victoria with those expressive eyes. Up close, she could see he was probably in his early 40s, with smile lines around his eyes and mouth that suggested someone who laughed often, though he wasn't laughing now. His clothes were worn but clean, work pants, a flannel shirt, sturdy boots. His hands were calloused from manual labor. "Are you all right?" he asked. And the question surprised Victoria because she'd expected another lecture, more judgment, not concern. "I'm fine," she said curtly. "I didn't hit him. He walked into my mirror." "Because your car was blocking the crosswalk," the man said gently. "I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just pointing out that when you're driving something that size," he gestured to the Range Rover, "you have to be extra careful, especially around kids." Victoria felt tears of frustration prick her eyes, which made her even angrier. She never cried, and she certainly wasn't going to cry in front of this stranger in the middle of the street. "I know how to drive," she said, her voice cold. "And I don't need a lecture from—" She stopped herself, but not quickly enough. The man's expression shifted, something sad flickering across his face. "From someone like me?" he finished quietly. "A dwarf? Or were you going to say someone in dirty work clothes? Someone who's clearly not in your tax bracket?" Victoria's face burned. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." The man sighed, but there was no anger in it, just a weary kind of recognition, as if he'd heard this all before, been dismissed this way countless times. "Look, I don't know you, and you don't know me. But I know that you almost hurt a child today because you weren't paying attention. I saw you on your phone when you ran that light. I saw you looking down instead of at the road. And now a little boy has a bruised arm and a scare that he'll remember. Maybe you should think about that instead of worrying about who's lecturing you." He turned to walk away, and Victoria surprised herself by calling out, "Wait." The man paused, looking back at her. Victoria didn't know what she wanted to say. She just knew that something about this moment felt important, felt like it mattered in a way she couldn't explain. I'm sorry," she said, and the words felt foreign in her mouth because she couldn't remember the last time she'd apologized to anyone and meant it. "You're right. I wasn't paying attention. I could have hurt him worse. I should have been more careful." The man studied her for a long moment, and Victoria had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing past her designer clothes and perfect hair and expensive car, seeing something underneath that she worked very hard to keep hidden. "Apology accepted," he finally said. "Just try to be more present, okay? Life happens while you're looking down at your phone, and sometimes if you're not paying attention, you miss it, or worse, you hurt someone." He walked away then, heading down the sidewalk with a purposeful stride despite his short stature. Victoria watched him go, feeling off balance, feeling something she didn't want to name. She got back in her Range Rover, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. The shopping trip suddenly felt pointless. She drove home instead, pulling into the massive garage and sitting in the car for a long time, replaying the scene in her head. That night, Richard Pierce came to Victoria's room before dinner. He knocked, which he always did now, having learned that barging in would just start another fight. "Come in," Victoria called, and her father entered, looking tired. He always looked tired lately, the weight of his empire and his difficult daughter both pressing down on him. "I wanted to talk to you," Richard said, sitting in the chair by Victoria's window. "About last night. And about everything, really." Victoria sat up on her bed, defensive walls already rising. "If this is another lecture—" "It's not a lecture. It's a conversation. Or I'd like it to be." Richard ran a hand over his face. "Victoria, I failed you. I see that now. After your mother died, I threw myself into work because I didn't know how to handle the grief, and I threw money at you because I didn't know how to be a father on my own. I made you think that things were a substitute for love, that having everything meant being happy. And I was wrong." Victoria stared at her father, shocked into silence. Richard Pierce never admitted he was wrong about anything. "I'm not happy," Victoria said quietly. the admission slipping out before she could stop it. I have everything, and I'm not happy. I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you, Richard said firmly. But there might be something wrong with how you're living. When was the last time you did something meaningful? Something that mattered? Something that helped someone else instead of just serving yourself? Victoria thought about the man from that morning, the way he'd immediately gone to the child's aid, the way he'd spoken with such genuine concern. She thought about his calloused hands and worn clothes and the way he'd looked at her, not with envy for what she had, but with something that looked almost like pity. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice small. Then learn, Richard said. I have an idea. It's probably going to make you angry, but I'm going to suggest it anyway. There's a community center downtown in one of the neighborhoods we're developing. They run programs for kids, job training for adults, all sorts of community services. They're always looking for volunteers. I've donated money over the years, but money's not the same as time, as presence. I think you should volunteer there. Spend time with people who aren't like you, who don't have what you have. See what their lives are like. Learn what actually matters. Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, to throw a tantrum, to say that her father couldn't make her do anything. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the near accident that morning. Maybe it was the way that man had looked at her. Maybe it was the emptiness she could no longer ignore. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll try it. Richard looked stunned. Really? Really? But just for a little while. If I hate it, I'm not staying. Fair enough. Richard stood, and for the first time in months, he smiled at his daughter. Thank you for being willing to try. 2 days later, Victoria walked into the Riverside Community Center wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, feeling more uncomfortable than she'd ever felt in her most elaborate evening gown. She'd left her designer bags and expensive jewelry at home, trying to blend in, though her hair and nails and the subtle glow of wealth still marked her as different. The center was housed in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and high ceilings, filled with the sounds of children playing and people talking. It smelled like coffee and paint, and that particular scent of many people occupying the same space. Victoria approached the front desk, where a cheerful woman with gray hair and kind eyes greeted her. You must be Victoria. Your father called ahead. I'm Margaret. I run this place. We're so glad you're here to help. Margaret gave Victoria a quick tour, showing her the various rooms and programs. There was a homework help area for kids, a computer lab teaching job skills to adults, an art studio, a small gym, a kitchen that served free meals twice a day. The center was bustling with activity, everyone seemingly knowing everyone else, waves and greetings called out across rooms. We need help in the children's program most urgently, Margaret said. We have after-school activities and we're always short on volunteers. Do you like working with kids? Victoria had never really been around children. She had no younger siblings, no young cousins she saw regularly, but she nodded anyway, figuring it couldn't be that hard. Margaret led her to a large room set up for various activities, tables for homework, a corner with cushions and books, areas for games and crafts. About 15 children of various ages were scattered around the space, ranging from maybe 5 to 12 years old. Supervising them all was a man crouched down next to a small girl, helping her with what looked like a math worksheet. When he stood and turned toward the door, Victoria's breath caught. It was him, the man from the street, the dwarf who'd helped the injured boy, who'd called her out on her carelessness, who'd looked at her with disappointment and pity. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face, but he recovered quickly, walking over with a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Victoria, this is Thomas Rivera, Margaret said. He's been volunteering here for 5 years now, and he's wonderful with the kids. Thomas, this is Victoria Pierce. She's going to be helping out in the children's program. Thomas extended his hand. Victoria shook it, feeling the rough calluses, noticing how small his hand was in hers but how firm his grip was. "We've actually met," Thomas said mildly. "Sort of. On the street a couple days ago." Margaret looked between them curiously. "Small world?" "Very small," Victoria murmured. Margaret left them to get acquainted, and an awkward silence stretched between them. The children in the room were watching with open curiosity, kids being naturally more interested in new people than adults. "So," Thomas finally said, "what brings you here? Community service hours for a DUI or something?" Victoria felt her face flush. "No, My father thought it would be good for me to volunteer, to see how other people live, to learn some humility, I guess." "Humility? That's a tall order." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not trying to make this harder than it needs to be. You're here, and we need help. So let's just focus on that. These kids don't care who your father is or what kind of car you drive. They just want attention and help with their homework and someone to play games with them. Think you can do that?" "I can try," Victoria said. Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, come on. I'll introduce you to everyone." The children were a diverse group, reflecting the neighborhood's mixed demographics. Thomas knew each one by name, knew their interests and struggles, knew which one needed help with math and which one was dealing with a bully at school and which one just needed someone to listen to them talk about their day. He introduced Victoria to each child patiently, telling her a little bit about them, creating connections. The kids were curious but welcoming, especially the younger ones who immediately wanted to show Victoria their drawings or ask her to play. Victoria found herself assigned to help with homework, sitting at a table with 3 kids of varying ages. She quickly realized how little she remembered from elementary school math and spelling, and how hard it was to explain concepts to children who learned differently than she did. But Thomas was there, moving from table to table, offering gentle guidance, showing Victoria techniques for breaking down problems, for being patient, for encouraging rather than just giving answers. "You can't just tell them the answer," he said quietly, when Victoria got frustrated with a boy struggling with fractions. "They need to understand the process. Try using visuals. Cut up these pieces of paper to represent the fractions. Let him see what a half looks like versus a quarter." Victoria followed his advice, and the boy's face lit up when he finally understood. That light, that moment of comprehension and pride, made something warm bloom in Victoria's chest. Over the following weeks, Victoria came to the center 3 times a week. At first, it was obligation, fulfilling her promise to her father. But gradually, something shifted. She began to look forward to her afternoons there, to the children who greeted her enthusiastically, to the feeling of being useful in a real, tangible way. And she began to watch Thomas. She watched how he interacted with the kids, how he never talked down to them despite their height difference being less than with most adults. She watched how he listened, really listened, giving each child his full attention. She watched how he celebrated their successes and helped them through their failures with equal care. She learned that Thomas was a carpenter, that he ran his own small business making custom furniture, that he was a single father to a teenage daughter named Maria, who sometimes came to the center to help out, that he'd lost his wife to cancer 8 years ago and had raised Maria alone since she was 6, that he'd been volunteering at the center since shortly after his wife died, needing something meaningful to focus on, needing to give back to a community that had supported him through his grief. She learned that he was patient and kind and funny, that he had a quick wit and a warm laugh, that the children adored him and Margaret relied on him heavily. She also learned that he didn't think much of her, not in an actively hostile way, but in a general sense that he'd looked at her and found her wanting, found her frivolous and shallow and exactly what she appeared to be on the surface. It bothered Victoria more than she wanted to admit. She found herself trying harder when Thomas was around, being more patient with the kids, asking better questions, really engaging rather than just going through the motions. She told herself it was about proving him wrong, about showing that she was more than her father's spoiled daughter. But deep down, she knew it was because she wanted him to see her differently. She wanted him to look at her the way he looked at the people he respected, with warmth and genuine regard. One afternoon, about 2 months into her volunteering, Victoria was reading to a group of younger children when one little girl, Elena, climbed into her lap. It was such a natural, trusting gesture, this child curling up against her as Victoria read, and Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. When had anyone last shown her such uncomplicated affection? When had anyone wanted her presence just for herself, not for what she could buy them or who her father was? After the reading, Victoria excused herself to the bathroom. She sat in the stall, her hands shaking, overwhelmed by feelings she couldn't name. When she finally emerged, Thomas was waiting in the hallway, concern clear on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Margaret said you looked upset." "I'm fine," Victoria said automatically, then corrected herself. "No, I'm not fine, but I don't know how to explain it." Thomas gestured to a small office nearby, Margaret's office, currently empty. "Want to talk about it?" They sat in the office, Thomas in a regular chair, his feet not quite touching the floor. Victoria in another chair, feeling too big and too seen all at once. "Elena climbed into my lap while I was reading," Victoria said quietly, "and I realized that no one has just wanted to be close to me like that in years. Everyone in my life wants something from me. Access to my father, or money, or connections, or just the status of knowing me. But Elena just wanted someone to read to her. She didn't care that I'm Richard Pierce's daughter. She didn't care about my clothes, or my car, or my trust fund. She just wanted a story and someone to cuddle with while she listened." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "And that made you sad?" "It made me realize how alone I am. How empty my life is. I have everything, Thomas, everything money can buy, and none of it matters. None of it fills the hole inside me." "What do you think would fill it?" Thomas asked gently. Victoria looked at him, this man who had so little compared to her wealth, but who seemed so rich in the ways that mattered. "This," she said, "mattering to someone, being useful, making a real difference. Feeling like my presence in the world means something beyond just taking up space and consuming things." Thomas nodded slowly. "You know, I had you pegged wrong when we met. I thought you were just another spoiled rich girl slumming it for a few weeks before going back to your real life. But you keep showing up. You're getting better with the kids. You're actually trying. Why?" Victoria thought about how to answer honestly. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something real, something that matters. And because—" She hesitated. "Because I want you to not look at me the way you did that day on the street. Like I was less than. Like I was a disappointment." "I never thought you were less than," Thomas said quietly. "I thought you were lost. There's a difference. And for what it's worth, I don't look at you that way anymore. I see someone trying to find her way. That takes courage." Their eyes met and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, recognition, the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Over the following months, Victoria and Thomas became friends. They worked side by side in the children's program, and gradually, Thomas opened up to her about his life, about his wife, Carmen, who'd been a teacher and whose death had devastated him. About Maria, his daughter, who was 15 now, and brilliant and sometimes struggled with the same judgment that Thomas faced for his height. "People see her father as a dwarf, and they make assumptions," Thomas said one evening after the center had closed and they were cleaning up. "They assume she'll be small too, even though she's average height taking after her mother. They assume I can't really take care of her, that I'm somehow less capable as a parent. And Maria, she's fiercely protective of me, gets in fights with kids at school who make comments. I wish she didn't have to defend me, you know? I wish the world could just see people for who they are inside, not just what they look like on the outside. Victoria thought about how she'd almost dismissed Thomas that first day, how she'd been about to say something cruel before stopping herself. She thought about all the judgments she'd made in her life based on appearances, on surface-level assessments, on assumptions about worth and value. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the way I looked at you that day we met, for what I almost said. I was exactly the kind of person you're talking about." "Was," Thomas said, meeting her eyes. "Past tense. People can change, Victoria. I've watched you change over these past months. You're not the same person who ran that red light." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know who I am if I'm not Richard Pierce's daughter. If I'm not the girl with all the money and the nice cars and the perfect clothes. I've spent my whole life being that person, and now I realize she's not real. She's just a shell I've been hiding inside." Thomas reached over and took her hand, his small, calloused hand wrapping around hers. "Then figure out who you really are. You have time. You have resources. Use them for something meaningful. Stop running from the emptiness and start filling it with things that matter." Their friendship deepened into something more, though neither of them spoke it aloud at first. It was there in the way Victoria's heart sped up when Thomas walked into a room, in the way Thomas's eyes sought her out in a crowd, in the lingering touches, the long conversations that stretched past the end of volunteer hours, the way they both found excuses to stay late at the center just to spend more time together. But there were obstacles. Victoria's world was one of wealth and privilege, of galas and charity events, and social circles where everyone looked and dressed and spoke a certain way. Thomas's world was one of honest work and community and substance over style. They came from such different places, moved through such different spaces. And then there was the height difference. Victoria was 5'7", Thomas 3'8". In a world that already judged them both harshly for different reasons, their relationship would invite even more scrutiny, more whispers, more assumptions about why they were together. Victoria's father was the first to notice the shift in his daughter. She was different now, softer, more present, actually interested in things beyond shopping and social media. She talked about the kids at the center with genuine affection, talked about Thomas with something in her voice that Richard hadn't heard in years. "You care about him," Richard observed one evening over dinner. Victoria didn't deny it. "I do. He's real, Dad. He's genuine. There's no pretense, no games. He sees me, not the money or the name. Just me. And somehow that's both terrifying and the best feeling I've ever had." "And how does he feel about you?" "I don't know. We're friends. Good friends. But I don't know if it could be more than that. We're so different. And people would judge. They'd say terrible things about both of us." Richard set down his fork, looking at his daughter seriously. "Victoria, I've spent my life building an empire. I've made billions of dollars, created thousands of jobs, changed entire industries. And you know what? None of it made me as happy as the years I had with your mother. Love, real love, is the only thing that actually matters. Everything else is just noise. If you care about this man, if he makes you a better version of yourself, then who gives a damn what people say?" It was Thomas's daughter, Maria, who finally pushed things into the open. She came to the center one afternoon to find Victoria and her father cleaning up after art time, laughing together over something one of the kids had said, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd spent a lot of time together. Maria watched them for a moment, then approached Victoria directly. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. "Privately?" They went outside, sitting on the steps of the community center. Maria was tall, like her mother had been, with Thomas's dark eyes and expressive face. She studied Victoria carefully before speaking. "My dad likes you," Maria said bluntly. "Like, really likes you." But he won't do anything about it because he thinks you're out of his league or that people would judge you for being with him or some other stupid reason that's really just him being scared. Victoria felt her heart race. He said that? Not exactly, but I know my dad. I see how he looks at you, and I see how you look at him. So I'm just going to say this straight. If you care about him, if this is real, then you need to tell him. Because he's been alone for 8 years and he deserves to be happy. And if you're just slumming it, if this is some phase before you go back to your real life, then you need to leave now before you break his heart. The directness was startling, but Victoria appreciated it. I care about him, she said honestly, more than I've ever cared about anyone. But I'm scared too. What if I'm not good enough for him? What if I can't be what he needs? Maria's expression softened. The fact that you're worried about that tells me you probably are good enough. Just be honest with him. That's all I'm asking. That evening, after the center closed and the last child had been picked up, Victoria asked Thomas if they could talk. They sat in the quiet activity room, surrounded by children's artwork on the walls and the lingering smell of tempera paint. Thomas, I need to tell you something, Victoria began, her heart pounding. And I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay? Thomas nodded, concern flickering across his face. When we met, I was everything you thought I was. Spoiled, careless, empty. I had this huge life filled with expensive things and important connections, and none of it meant anything. I was desperately unhappy and didn't even know it. And then I came here, and I met these kids, and I met you, and everything changed. You showed me what actually matters. You showed me that real wealth isn't money. It's connection and purpose and making a difference. You showed me who I could be if I stopped hiding behind my father's name and started being authentic. Victoria paused, gathering courage. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, with your kindness and your humor and the way you see the best in people, with your patience and your strength and the way you've built a beautiful life despite everything you've lost. I love how you are with these kids, how you are with your daughter, how you move through the world with such dignity and grace. I love you, Thomas. And I know we're from different worlds, and I know people would judge us, and I know I come with a lot of baggage and problems, but I needed to tell you how I feel, because you've taught me to be brave, and this is me trying to be brave. Thomas sat very still, his eyes shining with emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Victoria, I've been in love with you for months, but I kept telling myself it was impossible. That you'd wake up one day and realize you could have anyone. And why would you choose me? That your world and mine don't mix. That I'd be a burden on you. That people would say terrible things, that your father would never accept it. My father told me that love is the only thing that actually matters, Victoria said. That everything else is just noise. And Maria told me to be honest with you. So here's my honesty. I don't care what people say. I don't care if they judge us or whisper about us or make assumptions. All I care about is how I feel when I'm with you, which is more myself than I've ever been. You don't make me feel less than because of my past. You make me want to be better, and I hope I can do the same for you. Thomas stood up and walked over to where Victoria sat. Even standing, he was shorter than she was sitting, but it didn't matter. He reached up and cupped her face in his small, calloused hands, and Victoria leaned into the touch. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength and your vulnerability and the way you fought to become someone real. I love watching you with the kids, seeing you discover parts of yourself you didn't know existed. I love your honesty and your courage. And yes, I'm scared of what people will say and how they'll judge us. But I'm more scared of losing you. Victoria leaned down, and Thomas reached up, and they met in the middle in a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and new beginnings. Their relationship became public gradually. Thomas introduced Victoria to Maria officially as his girlfriend, and Maria hugged Victoria fiercely, welcoming her into their small family. Victoria brought Thomas to meet her father, terrified of Richard's reaction, only to have her father shake Thomas's hand warmly and thank him for bringing his daughter back to life. "I don't care about height or background or any of that," Richard said firmly. "I care that you treat my daughter with respect and kindness, and that she's happier than I've seen her in 20 years. That's all that matters to me." The public reaction was more complicated. When Victoria and Thomas attended a charity gala together, the one her father hosted annually for his foundation, the whispers started immediately. People stared, some openly, others pretending not to. Victoria heard the comments, saw the looks, felt the judgment pressing down on them from all sides. Why is she with him? Is it some kind of publicity stunt? Poor thing probably thinks it makes her look charitable, dating a dwarf. Can you imagine? Richard Pierce's daughter with someone like that? Victoria felt Thomas tense beside her, felt him start to withdraw into himself the way people did when they'd been hurt too many times. She grabbed his hand tighter and turned to face him, ignoring everyone else in the room. "Dance with me," she said. "Victoria, I don't—" "Dance with me," she repeated, leading him to the dance floor. Other couples moved aside, creating a circle of space around them, and Victoria could feel hundreds of eyes watching, waiting to see what would happen, waiting to judge. Thomas looked up at her, his expression vulnerable. "Everyone's watching." "Let them watch," Victoria said softly. She knelt down on the dance floor in her expensive gown, bringing herself to his eye level. "Let them see that I choose you, that I love you, that their opinions mean nothing compared to what we have." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He pulled her close, and they swayed together there on the dance floor, Victoria on her knees, Thomas holding her, both of them finding their own rhythm that had nothing to do with the music playing. The room fell silent around them. Victoria didn't care. In that moment, there was only Thomas, only the feeling of his arms around her, only the steady beat of his heart against hers. When the dance ended, Victoria stood, helping Thomas to his feet. She faced the crowd with her head high, daring anyone to say something. Her father was crying openly, pride written all over his face. Margaret from the community center was there too, applauding loudly, and suddenly others joined in. A wave of applause that started small but grew, drowning out the whispers and judgment. Not everyone clapped. Some people still stared with disapproval or confusion. But Victoria realized she didn't need everyone to understand. She only needed the people who mattered to accept them, and those people already did. The months that followed were a period of profound transformation for Victoria. She enrolled in community college, taking education courses, discovering that she loved teaching. She continued volunteering at the center, but also started pushing her father's foundation to do more than just write checks, to actually engage with communities, to listen to what people needed, to use their resources to make real, lasting change. She sold most of her expensive clothes, her designer bags, her collection of cars she'd never driven. She kept one reliable vehicle and donated the money from the rest to the community center and other organizations doing work that mattered. Her social circle changed completely. The wealthy friends who'd only been around for parties and gossip drifted away when Victoria stopped attending their events and started spending her time differently. She didn't miss them. Instead, she found herself surrounded by the families from the community center, by other volunteers, by people who valued substance over style. Thomas's daughter, Maria, became like the sister Victoria had never had. They bonded over their love for Thomas, over their shared experiences of feeling judged and misunderstood, over their determination to create lives of meaning and purpose. Richard Pierce, watching his daughter transform, started his own journey of change. He began spending less time at the office and more time actually seeing what his money was doing in the world. He joined Victoria at the community center, reading to children, funding new programs, learning names and stories instead of just signing checks. "You gave me my daughter back," Richard told Thomas one day when they were building new shelves for the center's library together. "You helped her find herself. I can never repay that." "She did the work," Thomas said simply. "I just showed her it was possible, and she gave me back my faith in people, in second chances, so I think we're even." A year after that first meeting on the street, Thomas proposed to Victoria in the community center, surrounded by the children they both loved. He didn't have an expensive ring. He'd made it himself in his workshop, a simple band of wood and silver that was more beautiful than any diamond, because of the love and care that had gone into its creation. "I can't give you the life you were born into," Thomas said as he knelt before her, a reversal of their dance at the gala. "I can't buy you mansions or luxury cars or vacations to exotic places. What I can give you is a life of meaning and purpose and love. A life where you matter not because of your name or your money, but because of who you are. A life where we work together to make the world a little bit better, one child, one person, one act of kindness at a time. Will you marry me?" Victoria knelt down too, meeting him at eye level the way she always did, the way that said they were equals in every way that mattered. "Yes," she said through tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The children erupted in cheers, and Maria was crying, and Margaret was already planning the reception in the community center, and Richard was beaming like Victoria had never seen him beam before. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the center. Victoria wore a simple dress, not a designer gown. Thomas wore a suit he'd owned for years, cleaned and pressed with care. Maria was the maid of honor, and Richard walked Victoria down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. The guest list was small: family, close friends, the families from the community center, the children they'd worked with. No society photographers, no press, no spectacle. Just people who loved them, who'd supported them, who understood what they'd found together. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, a small voice piped up from the children's section. It was Elena, the little girl who'd climbed into Victoria's lap that first afternoon. "I have something to say," Elena announced seriously. The room held its breath. Victoria smiled, encouraging her. "Miss Victoria was sad when she first came here," Elena said. "I could tell. But then she met Mr. Thomas, and she wasn't sad anymore. And Mr. Thomas smiles more now, too. They make each other happy, so I think they should definitely get married." The room erupted in laughter and agreement, and the ceremony continued, and when Thomas and Victoria kissed as husband and wife, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful and real and true. Their life together wasn't easy. They faced judgment and criticism from people who didn't understand, who couldn't see past surfaces to the depths beneath. There were difficult moments, hard conversations, times when the world pressed down on them with its expectations and assumptions. But there was also joy. So much joy. In the quiet mornings when Victoria woke up next to Thomas and felt grateful for another day together. In the afternoons at the community center, working side by side to help children discover their own potential. In the evenings with Maria, the three of them cooking dinner together in Thomas's modest house that had become their home. Victoria eventually got her teaching certificate and started working at the elementary school near the community center. She discovered she had a gift for reaching struggling students, for seeing potential in children that others had overlooked, for creating a classroom where every child felt valued and seen. Thomas's woodworking business grew as word spread about his craftsmanship, but he never let it grow so large that he couldn't keep doing the work himself, couldn't maintain the personal touch that made each piece special. Together, they created a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. Not wealthy in dollars, though they were comfortable, but wealthy in relationships, in purpose, in the knowledge that they were making a difference. Richard Pierce, inspired by his daughter's transformation, restructured his foundation to focus on sustainable community development, on empowering people rather than just providing handouts. He spent more and more time away from his business, delegating to trusted executives, choosing to invest his time in relationships and meaning rather than just accumulating more wealth. "I spent 30 years building an empire," Richard told Victoria and Thomas over dinner one night. "And in 1 year you showed me what actually matters. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I was poor in every way that counted. Thank you for teaching me a better way to live." 5 years after their wedding, Victoria and Thomas sat on the steps of the community center on a warm summer evening, watching children play in the parking lot that had been converted to a playground thanks to a grant from the Pierce Foundation. Maria was there too, home from college for the summer, leading a group of kids in a game of tag. "Do you ever miss it?" Thomas asked Victoria quietly. "The luxury, the ease, the life you had before?" Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting herself against him in the way they'd learned over their years together. "Not for a second," she said honestly. "That life was empty. This life is full. That Victoria was lost. This Victoria knows exactly who she is and what she's here for." "And who are you?" Thomas asked, smiling. "I'm your wife, Maria's stepmother, a teacher, a volunteer, someone who tries to make a difference, someone who loves and is loved, someone who matters because of what I do, not what I have." Victoria turned to look at Thomas, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm someone who learned that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives touched, in love given, in purpose found. And by that measure, I'm the richest person I know." Thomas kissed her then, there on the steps of the center where they'd found each other, where they'd both discovered who they were meant to be. Around them, the community they'd helped build thrived. Children playing, families gathering, lives being changed one small act of kindness at a time. A young girl walked past them, new to the center, looking lost and uncertain. Victoria recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, that expression of someone who had things but lacked purpose, who was present but not truly seen. Victoria stood extending her hand to the girl. "Hi," she said warmly. "I'm Victoria. Is this your first time here? Let me show you around. I think you're going to love this place. It changed my life. Maybe it will change yours too." The girl took her hand, and Victoria led her inside, Thomas following behind them. The door closed, and through the windows, you could see them welcoming this new child into their world, offering her what they'd both been given and now gave freely to others. The chance to be seen, to matter, to discover that real value comes not from what you own, but from who you are and what you give. The setting sun cast golden light across the center's worn brick walls, illuminating the sign above the door that read, "Riverside Community Center, where everyone matters." And inside, lives were being transformed, hearts were being opened, and the work of building a better world continued, one person, one moment, one act of love at a time. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what moment moved you most. Was it Victoria's transformation, Thomas's quiet strength, or maybe that dance at the gala? Your thoughts mean everything to us. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about what really matters in life, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Every like helps us reach more people with stories about love, redemption, and the courage it takes to become who we're meant to be. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart to these characters, and for believing that people can change and that love can transcend any barrier. You're the reason we keep telling these stories.